When Mr. White gets tired of designing houses, he relaxes his brain with designs for picture frames. He does a limited number of these, most of them for personal friends, and whoever is the proud possessor of one may regard himself as particularly fortunate, for there is the same chaste elegance about a white frame as there is about a white building.
This quote from an anonymous newspaper article was written in 1887 on the occasion of the award of the Boston Public Library Commission. Stanford White, the architect and third member of the renowned New York architectural firm of McKim, Mead & White, is a familiar name to most New Yorkers. He lived from 1853 to 1906. His death at the hands of jealous husband and madman Harry K. Thaw remains for many people the most memorable detail of White's illustrious and colorful life. Stanford White had wanted to be a painter, but John Lafarge discouraged his father, Richard Grant White, who then decided that his son should pursue a career in architecture. So, the young White was apprenticed to Henry Hobson Richardson from 1872 to 1878, eventually becoming the firm's ornament and decorative expert. After leaving Richardson's studio, he made a grand tour of Europe. Upon his return to New York in 1879, he joined Charles Follen McKim and William Rutherford Mead as a junior partner in the newly formed firm of McKim, Mead & White. Stanford White was described by one of his assistants, H. Van Buren McGonigal.
6 feet 2 or 3, with very long legs, broad shoulders, narrow hips, stiff tawny hair standing straight up and cut en brosse, a great red mustache, beetling light eyebrows overhanging little bright gray-green eyes with almost white eyelashes. His hands were large and strong and hairy with long blunt fingers. His radiated energy was terrific. A 5-minute visit from him left you limp with the reaction from the strain of trying to follow his thought as his fingers flew. He'd suddenly appear at your elbow and say, "That is the goddamnedest looking thing I ever saw." Stare at it for a while, seize his huge red mustache in both hands, and twist it until the hairs came out and fell on the paper. Or stick a brand new pencil into the grip of his big back teeth and twist it and spit out the splinters.
In the office, White's nickname was Benvenuto Cellini because he felt the design was based on ornament and decorative detail. As an architect, Stanford White designed many of the finest buildings in the United States. In his work, he emphasized physical beauty, placing primary importance upon the dynamic effects of light, color, texture, and ornament. Seen here are two views of one of his most famous buildings, Madison Square Garden, built from 1887 to 1891. Stanford White was the consummate designer, willing and enthusiastic to work in any medium. His repertoire ranged from tombstones and jewelry to book and magazine covers. White's genius extended far beyond architecture to include interior decoration, both public and private. One of the great triumphs of his work was the manner in which he collaborated with artists and incorporated a variety of different media and styles into a single project. The two examples seen here are the Admiral Farragut Monument in Madison Square with the sculpture of Augustus St. Gaudens and the base by White. St. Gaudens was one of White's closest friends as well as a frequent collaborator. The other is the Church of the Ascension, also in New York, where White designed the interior with the mural painted by John Lafarge, the mosaics by D. Maitland Armstrong, and the angels by Louis St. Gaudens, brother of Augustus. Architectural historian Richard Wilson has written that interiors were perhaps his greatest architectural accomplishment, for intuitively he disregarded the commonly accepted rules. White created his own unique brand of interior decoration, mixing styles, periods, textures, and colors. Here is a view of the ballroom at Rosecliff in Newport, Rhode Island, built from 1897 to 1902 for Herman and Tessie Ulrichs. The house was modeled after the Grand Trianon at Versailles and contained the largest ballroom in Newport. The dining room at Kingscote, another of the great, although smaller houses in Newport, illustrates the extraordinary range of Stanford White's imagination. Here White incorporated a variety of startling materials including cork, Tiffany Favre glass, and turned screens of interwoven spindles for a decorative effect that was totally innovative. Perhaps White's greatest feat and labor of love as an interior decorator was his own house at 121 East 21st Street. He rented this Gramercy Park residence in 1898 and began to renovate it. White was one of the most important interior decorators of his age, but as with architecture, the interiors were governed by a love of beauty and effect rather than a rigid replication of a particular style. Just as his architectural designs show a mixing and matching of various styles and ornament, so do his interiors. White had a passion for buying and collecting beautiful things. He also derived a considerable income as a dealer. He bought antiques and objects in great volume and sold them to his clients. The writer Eileen Saranen said,
Stanford White was obsessed with visual beauty. On his trips abroad, he bought compulsively, extravagantly, in enormous quantities, anything and everything that appealed to him. He bought not as an antiquarian, for he cared nothing about authenticity, but as an artist seeing an effect.
These views of the hall leading to the music room and the dining room show White's skills at assembling architectural fragments, including sculptural reliefs, doorways, columns, and entire ceilings. There was little regard for maintaining a single historical style. Rather, each object was selected because it appealed to Stanford White's aesthetic sensibility. The fountain and ballroom reveal more of White's eclectic love of beautiful things, which he combined to create lively and stimulating effects. The fountain had trout swimming about in it, and in the ballroom he displayed numerous musical instruments alongside tapestries. These interior views of White's picture gallery expose yet another facet of Stanford White, the collector and patron of the arts. He not only collected old masters, but brought contemporary work as well. Indeed, White was a prominent figure in the New York art world at the turn of the century. The view on the right shows a small portion of White's collection of nudes, which he commissioned from several of his artist friends. In writing to H. Siddons Mowbray, he said,
I should like a pan and some nymphs. All I want to impress upon you is the fact that I want you to make the picture alluring enough to scare all the straight-laced people in New York. If I carry out my intention and get a pretty decent little collection of nudes, I mean to give it to the Metropolitan Museum to shock everybody for all time.
Unfortunately, after White's untimely death, the nudes were dispersed at auction. Dewing's nude pastel is visible just to the left of the window. White instructed the framemaker Alexander Cabus that the carved ornament should have no more relief than a piece of lace laid on a flat board. Stanford considered the frame very special and told Cabus that under no circumstances should you make it or the wreathed frame for anybody. The stage for Stanford White, the frame designer, had been set by his skill as a designer and master of ornament, combined with his passion for collecting paintings, his intense and devoted friendships with artists who perpetually needed frames, and his role as a dealer in antique frames. White did a brisk trade in antique frames, which he often enlarged or cut down. These two frames were purchased by the Metropolitan Museum of Art from the estate sale after White's death. The artist Edward Simmons revealed the extent of White's collection of old frames.
One memorable Easter Sunday, the 10 were to open a show the next day, and we were hanging our artwork. Stanny appeared. I had 2 Marines which he liked, but he was greatly taken with a portrait of my grandmother, which was not yet framed. I had intended to get some 1.5-inch molding for it. He could never bear to have a work of art improperly dressed. I can see how he looked, beautifully groomed, with top hat, frock coat, evidently on his way to some smart affair. He looked at me for a moment, then grabbed the portrait and rushed from the place. Needless to say, I followed. We ended at his office, where he had a floor stored with all kinds of valuable antiques, draperies, frames, statues, which he had chosen in Europe, not because they were old or only one of a kind in existence, but because they were beautiful, and brought over here. He dove into dozens of frames which were piled at least 15 feet away from the wall. Ignoring his clothes, he dashed in and was covered with dust in 2 seconds. In 5 minutes, he had tried all the frames and found 2 that fitted the portrait.